Okay, hi everyone. We want to welcome you today to the AHA Foundation's training webinar, Know Your Rights, Preventing and Stopping Honor Violence in the U.S. Just a bit of an introduction to the webinar itself. Honor violence and forced marriage are forms of violence and abuse that are often overlooked or misunderstood. Now, for the last 7 years, the AHA Foundation has provided direct support to survivors of honor violence and forced marriage. We've advocated for the introduction of legislation to criminalize female genital mutilation or cutting. We've provided direct support to survivors of honor violence and forced marriage. We've also published studies that look specifically at the prevalence of honor killings and forced marriage in the U.S. And it has really been through our work that we have come to understand that people affected by honor violence often don't know what to do if they are actually experiencing honor violence or know of someone who is. So in this webinar, we will talk about honor violence and resources that are available to survivors. And one of the things we also want to highlight is that if you go to our website, and we will share with you the link later on in the webinar, we've developed a brochure that is also available as a handout in the control panel. And in the brochure, it provides a lot of the information that we will be presenting to you today during this webinar. And so one of the things that, again, one of the goals of this particular webinar is to help you better understand honor violence and forced marriage. And to do that, we have invited Ruth Trotter to join us. I'm sorry, if you could just give me a minute. There we go. Now, as a way of introduction to Ruth Trotter, most honor violence victims in the U.S. suffer in silence, their freedom of choice and expression, and their potential stolen from them. In its most extreme form, honor violence leads to an honor killing. Tragically, this was the fate of Amina and Sarah Saeed, two teenage girls from Dallas whose lives in chilling murder at the hands of their father, Yasser, are portrayed in the film The Price of Honor. Yasser Saeed may have tried to silence his daughter's voices, but advocates are making sure that Amina and Sarah are never silenced and that they live on, and that they will never be just a memory. Shortly before her murder, Amina and Joseph Moreno fell in love. Joseph's mother, Ruth, who is with us today, learned about the violence Amina and Sarah had to endure, and Amina's fear that they would be killed by their father. Ruth worked with her son to plan an escape for the girls. Unfortunately, Yasser murdered Amina and Sarah before they were able to successfully escape. Ruth has now become a vocal advocate for the girls and for honor violence awareness. She dedicates herself to giving a voice to these girls who have been silenced. And so, welcome, Ruth. I am Stephanie Baric, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. I'm the former executive director of the AHA Foundation, and before that I spent more than 20 years in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe fighting for women's rights and an end to violence against women and girls. So with that, we're going to begin with sort of a broad definition or overview of honor violence. Now, honor violence is committed to protect, defend, or regain perceived family or community honor. It is often linked to the belief that someone has brought shame to their family or community by doing something that supposedly counters the traditions or beliefs of their culture or religion. Women and girls may be seen as endangering the honor of their family or community through expressions of independence, especially if this independence is related to their sexuality. Now, this doesn't mean that men and boys are not affected by honor violence and forced marriage. They may be subjected to honor violence, and it could be that they're targeted by the family of a woman who believes the family was dishonored as a result of their marriage, or if a man or boy is believed to be homosexual or transgender. Honor violence can take many forms, such as verbal abuse, physical assault, attempted murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, forced marriage, shunning, ostracism, harassment, and even murder. In some cases, those experiencing honor violence are driven to or even encouraged by their families to commit suicide. Now, there are lots of reasons why honor violence may happen, but just to give you some examples, it may be that a woman or girl has become involved with a boyfriend, or in the case of, again, because men and boys are also affected by this issue, it may be that they have a girlfriend who's from a different culture or religion. The person affected by honor violence may be perceived as promiscuous or involved in a relationship of an intimate or sexual nature outside of marriage. They may be refusing to get married or expressing the desire to get out of a marriage, or they could be taking part in activities that we would deem as normal, such as wearing clothing or makeup that a family or their community may view as immodest, or socializing with members of the opposite gender. Now, one of the things that we definitely want to highlight is that honor violence can happen to anyone, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, level of education, or whether they were born in or outside of the U.S. Now, what is a forced marriage? A forced marriage is one that is carried out without the consent of both people. Often forced marriages are considered a way to control a person's behavior or sexuality, and it's often a key driver in honor violence. And one of the things that we definitely want anyone experiencing forced marriage, whether they are threatened by a forced marriage or they are actually in a forced marriage, what we want them to know is that there is no religious, cultural, or traditional justification for forcing someone into a marriage they don't want. And that anyone who thinks that, again, they are either threatened by a forced marriage or they're currently in a forced marriage, you are not betraying your faith, culture, or tradition by refusing to be in such a marriage. And now what I'd like to do is move over to some questions that we have for Ruth that will give us an idea of some of the issues that people affected by honor violence face. Ruth, maybe if you could begin by telling us about Amina Saeed and how you first met her. Sorry, Ruth isn't.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. And I'm sorry, Ruth,
Okay.
one thing that I just want to tell all the participants, and I didn't mention this earlier, there are several questions that I have for Ruth, and then what I'll do is provide an overview of some resources that are available to people affected by honor violence. But please feel free to send us your questions as we're going through the interview and the remaining presentation, because we will do a Q&A at the end of the session. So sorry about that, Ruth. Again, if you could tell us about Amina Saeed and how you first met her.
My son Joseph and I met Amina, her sister Sarah, and their brother Islam at a Taekwondo academy that they were all attending. Sarah and Islam did not stay, and Amina continued. And that's how Amina became part of our family and into our lives.
Okay, and when did you understand that there were issues with her father and her family?
As Joseph and Amina's relationship transitioned from friendship to a love boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, Amina was always protective of Joseph and their relationship. It initially struck me as peculiar, but I just wrote it off as it being, first love and all the new things that come with that. And shortly after that, it was more aware that maybe her father and or mother were just overprotective. and didn't want their daughters to date. And not long after that is Joseph started sharing things with me that Amina was sharing with him, and about that it wasn't just her father was being overprotective. And then Amina and I became friends, and she started having confidence and trusting and relying in me. And she started telling me things that about her situation at home, and that if there were rules that needed to be followed at home, and that if either girl did not follow the rules, that they would be severely punished. In the beginning, she didn't mention murder because, again, we were just at the beginning stages, and she was attaining confidence and trust with me. But I knew that she would have a consequence if she broke the rules.
And why do you think Amina didn't report what was happening with her family?
Amina and Sarah both actually attempted several times to report. Early on when they were younger, there was also sexual abuse, and they did cry out for help, but they were encouraged or told to retract that. And then other opportunities that the girls had, because what was going on in their home was not known. So they were failed with any kind of help or anything that came to the girls. They just felt like that they had no one to rely on to tell law enforcement, because they were both at a young age. They knew anything that they would share with any law enforcement social worker or educator that was in their life, that it would be told to their parents, and they knew that it would be worse for them at home.
And tell us, had you ever heard of honor violence or forced marriage before you met Amina?
No, I had never heard about such things, and regrettably, it wasn't until after Amina and Sarah were taken from us that I learned what this all meant and what we were living for the last 4 years of her life. It was shocking, and then also to know that it was something happening here in the United States.
Right. And when you reflect on what happened, what do you think you would, what would you do differently now?
Well, I would have found resources. Throughout my life, I have done a lot of volunteerism for many different causes. I would have done research. In the beginning, I did think it was child abuse or sexual abuse or overprotection, or um, although there are some similarities with, or that fall under the umbrella of domestic violence and child abuse, honor-based violence is an entity of its own. And had I known that it existed, I would have found a resource somewhere to try to seek a safe haven for Amina and Sarah.
Right. So in other words, you didn't really understand the extent of the threat at the time.
Well, as time passed, and when Amina did say about the threat of her life and the life of my son, I believed her from the beginning because of the things that she started sharing with me. She was constantly in a situation of honor-based violence. It wasn't just being under surveillance or scrutiny by her father and or her mother or her brother. It is the entire family. It's the entire community. And the freedoms that we have to surf the internet or text on our phone or watch television, victims that are in under honor-based violence do not have these liberties. Everything they do is scrutinized. And Amina found a way through her school to, during one of her classes, and that's when she started corresponding with me. And that's how she and I became closer, because she started revealing more things to me, and I knew the threat was real. However, she never labeled it honor violence. And because she was a minor, I knew my hands were tied, because, of course, the thought was, let's go to the police, or let's report it to Child Protective Services, or let's just run away. But I knew there were consequences running away with her, which I was ready to accept. However, that would have left Amina alone, because she had no one. We were her only source, and I couldn't do that to her. And that's when we started trying to implement a plan for her to, when she graduated from high school, to be with us.
You know, for women and girls who are afraid, like Amina was, what do you think they should do?
Well, first of all, I want the young girls to know they're not alone. Awareness is being raised. People now are knowledgeable of such horrors that are here, or anywhere in the globe. It's not just there in the States, it's everywhere. I want them to know they're not alone, and that they have resources now to seek safety. And I want them to know that they are important, and they do not have to be subjected to these horrors anymore.
Okay.
There are foundations and organizations that are out there to help them.
Ruth, there was one question that has come in that I think is relevant to some of the questions we've put forward to you. This one is, why was Amina not allowed to date your son?
Amina, well, he's not of Muslim faith, and Amina and Sarah were not allowed to date anyone, because there were plans in the future for them to be in a forced marriage. And really, they were limited to even friends.
Okay. And then the last question, as part of the interview, what advice would you give to frontline professionals who may encounter women and girls experiencing honor violence?
Well, I'd like to thank them today for taking a step towards becoming more knowledgeable. And any sites that they search for organizations and foundations, I think it's imperative that law enforcement, educators, social workers continue to research this and find avenues for these young girls. When one of these victims reaches out to you, it is a pivotal moment in their life, because it's not just, I'm going to report this. It's a matter of life and death for them, and that's probably one or only opportunity that someone in a position to help them is given. And to know where to guide these young women is extremely important. And take every case serious. This is not just, again, one perpetrator. It is their entire family and the community. And because most of these young girls in our situation, Amina and Sarah both were minors for most part of the relationship or the time she was with us, you're kind of left with your hands folded. But I know now because of the awareness that's being raised, more and more people want to give these young girls opportunity of life. And I think it's important, again, that they're not able to really look at the internet or anything freely, so it's important to bring it to the educators in school, because that's how they'll find out that there is help out there.
And how do you think, because you are one of the people interviewed in The Price of Honor, how do you think that film has helped to raise awareness about honor-based violence in the United States?
It has been a driving force. Prior to The Price of Honor, I had not heard anything about Amina and Sarah anymore. If Yasser was at large or if he was captured, it was like they had no voice anymore completely. They were completely forgotten about. And The Price of Honor has helped ignite the campaign and the force that these two young American-born, beautiful, amazing girls' lives mattered, and they need justice, and they also have a voice to share about what happened to them, and that it's not just an isolated situation in their home, that is out there everywhere. And I believe The Price of Honor has done that. After it premiered, we traveled the United States for different screenings to continue to raise awareness across the United States, and we were even invited to the United States Capitol, where Congress held a screening there. And Yasser has been placed on the FBI top 10, and he is now on Interpol as well.
Okay. And I just want to let our participants know that when we do get to Q&A, Ruth will be on, and she will be available to take any of your questions. So thank you, Ruth. There will be, I'm sure, more questions once we get through the slides about resources that are available for people experiencing honor violence. Now, in terms of finding help, in the U.S., there is a text line. If a person texts the word free to 741-741, they have the option of speaking with a crisis counselor, and it is an anonymous call, and it's private and secure and available 24/7. There are, local domestic violence organizations are also a good option, and we do provide. You can find more information on our website, and also here is a 1-800 number, 1-800-799-SAFE. Someone can call the National Domestic Hotline if they need help, and you can also find resources on the National Coalition to End Domestic Violence website, which we have listed on this particular slide. Sorry, one thing that I also wanted to mention is reporting to the authorities. If you or someone you know may be facing honor violence, you should contact your local police. And if you are in immediate danger, call 911 or your local emergency services and flee at once to a safe location if you are able to. If you are worried for your safety, ask the police not to leave you alone. This is something that Ruth had mentioned. One of Amina's concerns was that if they did report what was happening at home, that her parents would be informed, and that she was also concerned that she may stay in the house with her parents, and that, for obvious reasons, can create a lot of tensions, a lot of problems for people facing honor violence. You can request to be removed from your home, even if you are a minor under the age of 18. And if for whatever reason you don't want to contact the authorities, Ask someone to speak to the authorities on your behalf, like a friend or a relative or a trusted community leader or an attorney. So if you have experienced honor violence and you're not sure how to protect yourself, definitely speak to someone. And if for whatever reason you feel like you can't speak to a friend or a family member, then consider finding another adult or speak to a teacher, a school counselor, or another staff member. The important thing is to report it, to make people aware that you may be facing honor violence. And then if you do face the threat of being taken overseas for a forced marriage, please consider doing the following. Try to avoid leaving the U.S. One of the things that we have certainly experienced as an organization is that often it is much more difficult once a person is overseas to be able to find help if they've been taken outside of the country for a number of reasons. There are countries where the security situation may be a little hairy, and so it makes it difficult for embassy staff to get out to people who need their help. Or it may be a country where women and girls don't have the same kind of mobility as they do, say, in the U.S. So then, again, it becomes very difficult to actually reach anyone who may be facing a forced marriage. Find emergency safe housing, whether it's shelter or foster care. Definitely contact your local law enforcement to see what your options are in terms of receiving some kind of protection. You can contact the Office of Overseas Citizen Services of the Department of State, and there is a 1-800 number listed, and you can alert them to your situation. But if for whatever reason you think that you will probably be taken abroad, think of ways to alert TSA officers to your situation. And one of the things that we have recommended, women and girls, or really anyone who may be facing a forced marriage, is to carry, say, a spoon or something metal hidden in your clothing, because what it'll do is it'll set off the metal detectors, and that typically will give you enough time to inform TSA officers of your situation. And also make sure you memorize contact information for the U.S. Embassy or consulate in the country where you may be taken, so that you can contact them if you do need help. And please do check out the AHA Foundation's Know Your Rights brochure. There is the link to the brochure, and again, we also have the brochure as part of today's webinar. You'll see it down in the handouts. And what I'm looking at right now is we do have resources for those in Germany that we can make available to you. There is a German professor who's had some students confide about situations of forced marriage, and Sabatina James, someone we've been working with and know, has an organization that we can trust, and we're definitely happy to share that information over email. If you want to share with us your email, we can send you that information. Ruth, there was a question for you. What is the status of the case today with Amina and Sarah, and are the authorities still looking for Yasser?
Can you hear me, Stephanie?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I actually have no current updates other than what is on the FBI website and on Interpol. The last I spoke to the detective in charge in Louisville, or Irving, excuse me. They're saying they're looking for him, but still, nobody ever posts any of their sightings of him or any updates. So I wish I could give more information on that, but I really don't have a lot of information.
And then another question for you, Ruth, is, what is your advice to others who may know a girl who is at risk of honor violence?
My advice is to help them any way you can. Um, you have to also know that you are putting yourself at risk, but it's if you're not able to take that stand, then find someone that can to help someone that's crying out to you. Um, like to reiterate what I said earlier, when one of these victims of honor violence steps up to speak up to ask for help, it's not, it's a matter of life and death for them. So the fact that they're doing that is huge, and it needs to be acknowledged.
And then we received the question that if I call the AHA Foundation for help or advice, will the foundation report my information to the police? And one of the things that we want to make clear is that if you do come to the AHA Foundation seeking help, the help will be provided in a confidential way. But if we do feel in any way that you are physically threatened by what is happening, then we may take steps to report your situation to the authorities. But again, we want to also make it clear that any conversation we're having with someone experiencing honor violence, that we'd like them to know that the conversation is confidential. Ruth, there's a question that I think both of us could answer, but I'd also love to hear your perspective. The question is, what will it take to get religious leaders involved in the fight against these horrors? Do you have any thoughts?
I'll let you answer first while I think about my response on that one.
Okay, because it's actually an excellent question. And how I want to respond to this particular question is that religious leaders are obviously community leaders. And when you look at honor-based violence and forced marriage, social norms play a huge role. And what I mean by social norms is people's attitudes when it comes to gender or what is considered, appropriate behavior. And community leaders can play an important role in raising awareness within the communities to point out that some of these practices that are harmful are, in many respects, puts a community at risk, and that it cannot be in any way beneficial to the community that some of these practices continue. And so I think that when it comes to engaging religious leaders, it is important that we continue to put, in some cases to put pressure on them, but certainly to advocate for them to play a more central role in stopping some of these practices. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Ruth.
Well, for anyone, religious or anyone, a lot of people are hesitant to step forward because they do not want to be labeled as being Islamophobe or stereotyping as a particular culture or religion. And I think if everyone, including religious leaders, approach it as you are assisting or providing safety for a life, you're not pointing a finger at any other avenue other than, again, in Amina and Sarah's case, they were American citizens. We all have human rights. And I think if everyone would approach it that way, instead of pointing fingers of we're stereotyping or pinpointing, then it's no different than fighting for any other cause. And I think if everyone approaches that way, that more people would be more involved.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things I wanted to add is that, again, is, given the critical role that religious leaders can play, I think that what we need to do more of is sort of highlighting those leaders who are outspoken about these practices. Because I think that sometimes it can be difficult to be the only one to speak out about practices that, in some cultures and religion, have been taking place for really for centuries. And so I think that what we really should be doing is highlighting or really highlighting those leaders who have come forward who are outspoken about some of these practices, in addition to putting pressure on other leaders to speak out about honor violence and forced marriage. We had a question: in which specific cultures is honor violence more prevalent? And I think that, geographically speaking, honor violence and forced marriage are, they're prevalent in the Middle East, in Asia, and parts of Africa. But I think that what is important for people to know is that really any religion or culture, when we look at the cases that we have faced, and certainly some of the cases we've heard from peer organizations or from sister organizations, it's been it's actually quite surprising to see the wide range of cultures and religion that support these kinds of practices. I think that what has changed, certainly in the U.S. and in Europe to some extent, is that as we see more immigrants coming from countries where there is a high prevalence of honor violence and forced marriage, we're sort of confronted with these issues. Certainly we've started paying attention to the fact that we're seeing a rise in honor violence in our societies. But really, it's difficult to point to one religion or to one culture and say this is the root of the problem. We're just wondering, are there any more questions? We'll give you a couple of minutes if you want to send us some more questions. There is also the option of sending us questions after the webinar, if that's easier for you. Okay, I think that's it. Again, as you can see, here is a link to the brochure. The brochure is also available as a handout. Please feel free to share the brochure within your own networks. We're certainly more than prepared to make the brochure widely available. So please feel free to contact us, whether it's posting it on a website or sharing the link. If you have any thoughts on the brochure, any feedback, please feel free to share that with us. And I think that, I'm just waiting to see if there are any more questions. Okay, how can an ordinary citizen help is the question that we just received. There are multiple ways that you can help. I think that, whether it's getting involved in legislation around forced marriage, so advocating for legislation to prevent forced marriage. The other option is, I think that really raising awareness about the issue is definitely an important role that an ordinary citizen could play, and there are multiple ways of doing that. Whether you host a screening of a film like The Price of Honor, or whether you choose to have events where you invite special speakers to come and talk about the issues, definitely consider going to our website, to our Get Involved page, because there we have listed a number of ways that ordinary citizens can, when we say ordinary citizens, but really anyone, can take action to raise awareness about honor violence and forced marriage. So I'm waiting to see if there are any other questions. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you for joining us. And again, please feel free to write to us if you have any additional questions or feedback. Thank you, Ruth, for joining us. We very much appreciate everything you've been doing to really, promote the rights of women and girls and ensuring that they don't face what Amina and Sarah faced. And I would encourage everyone participating in the webinar to, if you haven't already done so, to see The Price of Honor. It's an excellent documentary, and also does a really fantastic job of helping you understand what are the kind of challenges anyone who is experiencing honor violence or forced marriage may face, not only in the U.S., but I think, again, in places in Europe as well, where because of the nature of honor violence and forced marriage, typically those problems are lumped in with domestic violence or with child abuse, and they certainly are a form of domestic violence or child abuse, but honor violence really does require a more distinctive response, given the root cause and also a lot of the sensitivities around some of the threats that survivors face. So again, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and send us any questions or feedback you may have. Thank you. Bye-bye.